Marvel Snap meets Clash Royale. That's what we're gonna build today, and this is part one of a series. The reason why I'm doing this is for a friend. We're gonna swap. I'm gonna make a game, and he's gonna give me art for my game. As you know, I'm making a VR monkey game, monkey wizard game, and I'm gonna trade because I need art, and so he needs this to practice game design principles. And so I'm building this for him and trading it. And so that's something that you can do if you have a friend that has complementary skill sets. You can swap for assets or code. It's an option. But I wanted to share this, and I got permission from him to share what I learned as I built this for him. This is very interesting because I've looked into card games and how to do them. And one of the things that it requires is obviously a multiplayer setup. And so oftentimes it requires servers and it gets very complicated real fast. And I looked online on YouTube for some videos on card games, and there's very little. There's some stuff on Clash Royale, like drag and drop cards into a field, but never like a finished product. And so I want to go over from the beginning to the end and use this to help indie devs that want to go into card games, whether it is real time or turn based card game. And I think this is a great example of how to turn it into a real time card game because that's not out there. Most card games, even the stuff that you buy on the asset store, are turn based because most card games are turn based. Okay, so we're gonna go over today. I'm gonna go over prototyping and then go over the code to help those that want to dive deep into it and learn how to do it for their own card game. And so this is what my friend gave me as a requirement. He wants the zones and the placement of the cards, the favor cost at the bottom with the energy, and the players at the top. I'm not gonna, this is part one, so I'm gonna show you how to prototype because a lot of developers, and you see this is very rough, a lot of developers get stuck at the beginning. They want to spend as much time polishing it because they want, their game to be something like this, right? Like they want to wait until their game looks like this before having someone play test it. And that's just not realistic. It You can do that, but it'll cost you time. And so before you spend a lot of hours on it, you want to get feedback as to how it feels. You want to play test. And so I want to talk about a little bit about prototyping because I have a school community where I help indie devs finish their game. And I noticed that a lot of them are hesitant to post their stuff because they want to wait until they're done. And so this is me showing you how rough things can be before you start showing. Because I think you can show progress at any point. And I think any progress you make is a win for your game. And you need those wins to help you motivate you to continue to work on your games. And so that's why I built a school community called Endgame Devs to help indie devs finish their game. But I want to show you this so that you can see how it works. And it's very rough. But the main thing that this solves is the energy cost because that is like a fundamental. And as I was thinking about the setup and the foundation of the game, the difference between turn based and energy cost you think is just like an afterthought, but it basically is the whole network setup because depending on how it goes, how the turns are set up, is the flow of the game, and that's has to be networked across multiple players. So it's key. It's a key feature and it's a foundation for your game. And so that's where I wanted to start and wanted to show you things today. And this is specifically for my friend who's the artist who's doing this. So let's start. This game is already running. So I have edit deck. It doesn't exist. It doesn't work right now. The only thing that works is this join match. And I still have to do the resizing. Again, this is very like the beginning. Nothing has started. Okay. I'm going to put this to the side. I'm going to join because the game is not going to start until I join with this setup. Okay, so I'm going to show you once I click here. Once I join with this one, it will show me on the other one. So we're starting, joining the match. And as you can see, we started and these are separate, right? So I'm going to show you um, the idea with that bar. And I know this is way bad. So I'm going to put it in between here. So you can see the number there. So we have both 10 favor. And so what happens is when I press this button, you should see that, watch, it spends five favors. So every time I press it, it will spend 5 favors. So this is a test to show you the Clash Royale setup, right? This is the energy. This is how the game is gonna flow, and it has to be persistent across players. And so this player will spend it, and if I click on this one, you'll see that it will only spend on this one. So each player has its own energy and is networked across. And you don't see it because you don't care how much the other player has. We might have to show that because in Clash Royale it does show, but in the picture, for example, that we have of this concept, it's not there, right? We have the time left, and we don't have the other person's energy cost, which in Clash Royale is a tactic. Right, you're looking at what your opponent is spending in real time, and that's part of the strategy. So we might have to change that, right? So that this is up here for the other players, so that they're not cheating, right? Because if they're a max and then they're constantly spending, they're obviously cheating or something. But anyway, so this is the start, right? I have nothing. I don't even have the names, and I could set that up, but I didn't. I didn't want to bother because it's just a name. Okay, for testing, I don't need it. Eventually, we'll want to put the names and the decks and whatnot. Um, okay, so let's talk about prototyping. This is me going over and thinking about, okay, what do I need to solve first, right? And what is the essence of the game? As you can tell, like the first flow, a lot of players or developers, when they think about card games, they'll think, oh, I need to build a card system, the deck system, so that someone can start building cards and decks. And then you have all this like crazy setup, and you haven't even started like the gameplay, right? And so before I even start with the cards, I'm gonna do the functionality of like setting cards, maybe an empty card with a favor cost, so that instead of pressing a button, I'll actually drag, do the check, so that if you don't have enough favor, you can't put that card and what to do. So like the server pings back and forth. So that kind of stuff, right? And once I do that, I'm gonna have sample decks that you can't change, that you'll probably have to edit in the editor to test. Because again, the purpose of this build that I'm gonna make for my friend is not to have a full-fledged game, but is to have enough pieces for him to design a game around, right? To create spells, create um, effects, different cards, and be able to do that within this space. And then I want to show you how I've done it so that you can make your own type of game, and not just like this specific one. Because that's what I've seen a lot in the asset store, is that a lot of these assets are like, even though they want to do a bunch of stuff, it's not very flexible. And it's really hard to just make an asset that you can change into any kind of card game, right? And so I want to show you what I've done so that you can do better. Okay, so let's go over. I'm going to show you a little bit of what I've done with the code. So if we go, so this is using Fusion. The reason why I use Fusion is because it's super simple and super fast to do. You can look up online how to use Photon Fusion 2 and how to install it and all that. There's tutorials out there. But the main thing is I have a loading scene. Obviously, we wait to join the match, and there's a simple connect here with a runner. It will activate the runner, and the runner will do the connection to the scene. because Fusion has an auto connect that will load the next scene, and that makes it a lot easier. Um, so let me load the scripts. Okay. And this is something that I also, when looking at network tutorials, they dive into like 3-part videos on setting up the server. And to avoid that, I just want to make it simple. Again, this is not to do a full-fledged like anti-hacking card game for you to launch. The whole point of this is to get an understanding on how to build your game and make it fun. And if you want to publish it, you can. And then you can switch it up to this is a peer to peer setup with Fusion. And if you wanted to do a dedicated server, you could. But I'm just trying to simplify the steps so that we can get prototyping faster. And so I have this launch game script in here, and it's just a simple connector runner function. You see these in Fusion all the time. Like this is the scene information. I just give it the next index. You can do some fancy code to say instead of the index in here, right? So I have two scenes. You look in build settings. I have the loading scene and the game scene, and that's it. You can get fancy, but I've noticed that a lot of times when you start doing a lot of fancy stuff with the scene setup, it can get confusing. So I just simple go to the first scene because that's the game scene, and here I need to change it to 2, obviously, because we're all only gonna have 2 players join, not 20. And then what's gonna happen is the moment 2 players join a session, if a third person joins, it'll just create a new game. And so this will be fast for room setup. And you can have 4-player games if you want. You'll see later how all this is done. And this is I have this shutdown in case so on room if it fails. I have all these exceptions that you can check if you want. I usually copy paste this from previous projects. It's just nice to have the shutdown reasons so that you can kind of go through. These are some of the ones that sometimes pop up. Like sometimes you created code that shuts down the game for some reason. And so you need, if you messed up, usually this means you messed up because you shut it down. Or sometimes you do want to shut it down and you want to know why. The connection timeout in VR that happens a lot. Operation canceled if someone like cancel halfway through while connecting, or the plugin disconnected. Okay. So the super simple. It goes to the first scene. Okay. Nothing fancy. We can set the display name, and then we have this board with a timer, and this is where most of the stuff happens. So we have 2 scripts that are the main components. We have the game manager, and then we have the client, the player, right? So the way I structure and I'm going to lay out the foundation is that I will have the game having all the pieces and knowing what's going on, but the display of each player will have the information for each player, right? Like what card they have, what they're seeing, their enemy cards, and so they will. And then as I go and as I test out and play the game, I'll figure out if there's a better solution for that, and I'll show the videos. But let me. So we have this player spawner. So what happens is the moment the player spawns in here, um, Fusion has this on spawn event. Spawned. Okay, so what happens is when anyone joins the game, the runner will activate all the network behaviors and spawn anything on spawn. So instead of doing on start, you do spawn. And what happens in here is I just spawn a player prefab for every time because this will happen on every player. It'll happen on the first player, on the second, and so forth. And then what I do in that player, I check, okay, again on spawn, say if I have state authority, find the game manager and set the canvas to true. If not, set it to false. And this is a good way if you wanted to display some of the players. For example, if I have my name, I could display my name to other players. But usually in the card game, I will use another method to display things because then you'll have two canvases, right, showing on the board, and then you'll have like overlapping things. So you can do that, or you can do it differently, however you want to. This is a way usually in 3D games, or like when you have a character, an avatar, and you have like a display name and other things that the player has, you can do that here. But because of the way the game will interact and the fact that eventually you'll want this to be server side, you'll probably do a lot of things, a lot of checks from the server instead of having the player itself show what they have. So this is not used as much. This is just like a quick hey on the canvas. And then on update, this is where we get the favor count. I will do a 10 minus. So I'll show you kind of what we do with the game manager. So we have this game manager, which is a network behavior. And the way we're using this, I'm using the asteroids. If you look on Fusion, they have a sample on the asteroid game, a simple asteroids game, and they have this ticker timer. So when the game starts, it'll create a timer. And I'm using the game timer, and then I'm using a second and third timer for the energy. That way it's tick accurate and it's networked across. So instead of me networking a float and then constantly updating on render, this does it on it. This does the update, so I don't have to rewrite the code, and it works. Uh, and so this is a nice fast way of doing a timer. And since the timer goes down, I have to do a reverse, and that's why I do the 10 minus. If you notice, I return 10, that means it's 0, because it does 10 minus 10 is 0. So the favor count will give me the remaining time in float. And the way I'm doing this, it's a hacky way, but for the sake of this simplicity, again, I'm trying to, in some areas, cut cost. And this is my first time making a card game. And so one thing that I'm doing is instead of trying to figure out who's who, the first player that comes will have a state authority over the game. It will be the master client, and so they'll have state authority. So they are the first player. So I just say if they have state authority, they're the first player, and if not, they're the second player. And that's what I do the whole game. So instead of storing them and saying this is player one and this is player two, I just do this. Although I could do player one and player two because when they log in, they'll have a count. But I didn't want to do that. Eventually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a button that the player will press when they're ready to play. Okay, so they'll press. So that way, instead of just starting from the get go, they'll have a, are you ready? Yes, yes. When they're both ready, it'll do a countdown 3, 2, 1, and it'll start. And maybe we'll do a countdown. We don't know. Maybe people don't like, they just want to get going with the game. So we'll do something like that. So instead of here start game, I might do a countdown before this starts. Um, so when the player joins, the moment we have more than one player means we can start the game, right? And so that's what you saw. So getting the current favor count and spending favor, right? So these are how most of the game will run is based on your energy or your favor count. In here, what I do again, it's a 10 minus. So if the game hasn't started, I give the client a number 10, meaning you have 0. Um, and the timer will go down. So it starts at 10 and it goes down. So when it goes down to 9, it means you have 1. And that's how the whole game will work is I'll add whatever value I have to the time in here. I'll add this value and it will add a time, and that time will be subtracted. And so it's kind of like a reverse, right? Because you usually take away. And so in order to do that, I have to make sure that when I do any checks for if you have enough value to use, um, this is something new that I just barely added in this tutorial to show you, and it takes a lot of back and forth to figure this out. But I want to show you. Um, how is this going to help you with your game? Let's say you're trying to build a card game, whether it's Clash Royale game or any card game, even 4 players or more, as many players as you want, or whatever mechanics you want. The whole point of prototyping is to, instead of starting with the easiest thing, you want to start with the gameplay. And with a card game, that is essentially the match. How is a match going to go from player to player? In this scenario, it's real time. But in a turn-based game, you have to set up the turns. So you might have a state machine where you set up the states of each player. So it's either player one or player two, or what, however many players, and they'll go through a state, right? Like a draw phase, standby phase, and that's why you see Yu-Gi-Oh and a lot of games that have all these phases, because the developers had to like establish rules, and so this making the rules available to players also, to have these phases makes it easier to make these state machines. But let's say you're following this and it's like, I don't want it to be real time. All you have to do is take this out, and decide to run your game how you want. The thing is, you might need, for example, eventually a timer to make sure that the player's not abusing their turn, right? And so sometimes they have max turns, and so you'll start a timer every time a turn starts, so that way the player only has 30 seconds or a minute to go through their turn. And then if they don't finish, they'll go through their phases and it'll skip to the next player, right? So that's something that you could do. So you'll still need a timer in one way or another. Um, but then you have to do the logic here, and that's how you start, because that's what you need first. Once you have the logic for how the game runs, you can start thinking about, okay, what's the winning condition and what's the fastest way to get to a winning condition. And you don't have to think of every winning condition, like I did with mine. For example, to test the favor count, I just had to have a button and I had this script. So I'm going to show you again. The favor button will automatically add a value of 5, and I'm going to show you that on the screen. And here, if we go to example, multiplayer prefabs, you have the client prefab. And in here, we have the client with a slider. This is a slider, and it'll grab and it'll do the subtraction. Um, and then this button, all it does is send favor. And I can change it in here to be a different number. Actually, let's do this, because 5 is not a good number, especially when the max is 10. Um, so in here, build prefabs. I'll have to make a build really quick so that I can show you. Okay, so you have the client. I'll show you really quick this code. There's not much. It's just the game manager is a quick, again, it's not the most robust way of finding mm, how to find an object, right? It's not performant. But right now I'm just focusing on getting it done so that we can test it out. And here we do the 10 minus to get the favor count, and this is what we end up with. And that's the value, and the text is rounded into an int, and this is the button. Super simple, right? There's not much in here, but having these classes and the setup with the energy cost already informs me about the play flow and how it feels, right? And now the rest is just trivial. We just add the cards, we have to add the zones, the placement, all that stuff is just time consuming, right? We have to set up the scriptable objects for the cards and the spells, the decks, the drawing, everything. I could do that with ChatGPT. That's super simple. But this setup, the network stuff, is the stuff that, like, the foundation. Once you have the foundation, it's super easy to build the rest. And like I showed you, I have a build that we can test, right? And that's what we're doing, because this is huge for your game. You might spend like hours building a card and coding all these like effects and scriptable objects with these cool cards, and you can make images and with Mid Journey, and they can look super cool. But you could be spending hundreds of hours and not have anything to show other than pictures. And so art and scripting, for the most part, are pretty straightforward. Like I just pay an artist and have the art. And so this might not look very appealing to you, right? Like I have these like super bad buttons and like I didn't take the time to do anything, literally anything. It's you might be embarrassed to show this, right? But we have something, right? Like I can start testing, right? And I'll show you on this one. So if I'll click it twice and you'll see it will not let me spend favor now if I don't have enough. So I'll show you. See, now I have, and it will let me see. And, and so it's already working. So we already made progress just by the one check. I'll show you where it is because I didn't have this before the tutorial. I had to there were some complications with the video, and so I went ahead and fixed the code. Uh, and it's right here. It's this 10 minus that I didn't have before. Um, and it'll just return. It won't let you do anything. If you have any questions, comment below. If you have a specific card game that you're trying to work with, that you have problems, let me know. My goal is to help every indie game developer that wants to finish their game to finish it. I'm trying to find 100,000 indie devs that want to finish their games. That's why I built this YouTube channel. I have a school community to help indie devs, and we can to help each other and to play test our games, help with wish listing, finding an audience, all these other things that you need to be able to publish a game and actually succeed as an indie developer. So if you know anyone that needs help or that wants to finish their game, let me know. Subscribe to this channel and join our community so you can get help finishing your game.